Hello, we are back. It is currently the 1st of May, which means April is over, which means it is time for the monthly book recap. Now, I will preface this before we go anywhere and say that April was a very slow month for me. I guess you'd call this a month of uphill battles. Well, in the end, yes, I did read 7 books. I'm shocked. It didn't feel like that, and honestly, most of them were, well, not most of them, but a lot of them were popcorn books on the e-reader. So, but we'll get into that. We'll get into why this was such an uphill month. But we'll start with the very first book I finished this month, which was BattleTech Legends Decision at Thunder Rift, which I believe, quote me if I'm wrong, that was the very first BattleTech book ever published, ever made. It was okay. It was good. Nice little revenge story. I like the mechs. I've talked about BattleTech before. I think maybe not all that closely, but BattleTech is what, as we know, I like to call a popcorn book. They're not really that difficult. I really don't think they have much to say, but they are entertaining for what they are. A nice, fun. Look at all these mechs. Look at all this military stuff. Books. Cool. Good. Fine. Which is great because I needed a fun book because at the same time, physically, I was reading Steven Erikson's Garden of the Moon. This book, how do I talk about this book? Because I hated this book. I hated reading this book. Reading this book felt like a chore. I dreaded reading it every day. There wasn't a single moment where I thought, oh boy, I get to read more Gardens of the Moon today. Boy, howdy, am I excited. But slowly, over the course of this 666 page book, very funny, it deserves the evil number, slowly it started to grow on me. I still can't tell you what happened. I still can't tell you who half of these characters are. This was the first time a book ever had a Dramatica persona. Yeah, one of these things that listed all the characters that I actually used because there are so many named characters. At least it feels like a lot, says the guy who reads Wheel of Time, but it felt like a lot, and it didn't help that the book was so slow and so just, I don't know. I had no idea what was happening. I don't know who Whiskey Jack is. I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know what gods were what. I already forgot the name of the one funny character who has the psychic dreams. It doesn't matter. People online will tell you that, oh, the second one is so much better because it was written like a decade after this one and Erikson learned how to write. Okay, cool. Maybe that's true. I don't know if I'm going to force myself to read it considering how, much of a torture job this felt, but who knows? If you like the Silmarillion, I guess is a good way to describe it, you'll probably like Gardens of the Moon because you can tell Erikson was what is he, a sociologist? Is that our yeah, anthropologist, archaeologist, and you can tell because God, is this written like a scientific paper in the worst way possible. That is not a compliment. But I don't know. I do like to torture myself. I am curious to see if Boy actually gets better, but it's very low on my priority list. So yeah, but after that, we read Bloodlines by Chris Wright, who cares? A Warhammer crime novel. Now, I love crime novels. I love mystery. I love noir. I've never read a sci-fi noir before because that's what I consider this book, a sci-fi noir. And it was fun. I liked the main character. He felt like, despite this being a Warhammer book, he felt like an average Joe. The mystery was pretty cool. There were some cool gunfights. It was good. If you like Warhammer, if you like the whole, wow, Warhammer sure is a horrible, miserable place to live in, you'll like seeing just a normal guy be miserable in Warhammer. It's nice to read a Warhammer story that isn't about Space Marines or Cassius Cain or Gaunt's ghosts or evil Space Marines or necromorphs or any of this stuff. It's really nice to read a Warhammer book about guy living on in a hive planet. Which, yes, Necromunda exists. I've read a few Necromunda books, but this is different. Necromunda is usually, in my experience, about the people in the Underhive, which is just more like it's just gang on gang violence. But he's a cop, so he's technically like part of the system, I guess, even though the system is useless on most of these planets because they've essentially been abandoned. But that's beside the point. It's good. Sci-fi noir. Never thought I'd want to read that, but it's cool, and I want more sci-fi noir. Then after that, I read Nothing But Blackened Teeth. Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, I believe. Or it's Cassandra. I think it's Cassandra Khaw. This was a very short read. My e-reader clocked it at like a clean 72 pages based on my font size. And it was a nice little ghost story. The prose were very nice. I think the prose definitely carried that book. But every single character in that book is an asshole, and I hated them. They were so unlikable. Even the guy that they paint all the time as being like Mr. Likable, cool guy, quarterback guy. Like that guy, I hate him because he's that. But it was cool. It wasn't like, the ghost isn't out here stabbing people or jump scaring or whatever, but it felt very heavy. It was a heavy presence in the story, despite being such a short book. If you can ever find it, I would recommend it. Like I said, my e-reader clocked it at like 72 pages, and I'm pretty sure Storygraph clocks it at like a clean 112 or something. That's nothing. It's very, very good little bite-sized treat. Then, at the same time I was reading those two books, I was once again struggling uphill with Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. Now, this book was published, not this copy, obviously, but Riders of the Purple Sage itself was published in 1912. It is probably the archetypal Western that created the archetypal Western. There is a damsel in distress, a gunman that shows up out of nowhere, fast horses, dogs, cattle rustling, like it is as Western can get. So if you read a lot of Westerns, this is going to feel cliche, but it's only cliche because it started those cliches. And it was fine. It was good. The problem is Zane Grey writes in a horribly slow way, and he kind of like, I don't know, sidesteps around anything that I would care about and spends most of the time talking about how pretty horses are and how cool it is that there's all this untouched nature in Nevada or wherever, in Utah that hasn't been destroyed by corporate America yet, which he didn't know what corporate America was, but you know what I mean, looking back, hindsight 2020. And then right after that, I read The Rainbow Trail, published in 1915, a technically direct sequel. There's no technically, it is unquestionably a direct sequel to Riders of the Purple Sage. All the main characters of Riders of the Purple Sage appear in it, but we follow a new dude named Shefford, and there's a lot more, surprisingly for a book written in 1915, pro-Native American, talk. I honestly, the more I thought about it, I like Rainbow Trail more. The last 100 pages were really good in Rainbow Trail, but it had the same problem, Riders of the Purple Sage, which is probably just how Zane Grey writes, I've never read any Zane Grey novels before this, and I'm going to be honest with you, unless I can find them for, dirt cheap, I'm probably never going to read another. They were fine. They were good. It was cool to read, the Western that wested the Westerns, but it was definitely a book from 1912. And then the last book I read this month, I literally finished up last night at 11:30, right before May came in. It was Redwall by Brian Jacuzzi? I'm going to assume it's Jacuzzi. Brian Jacuzzi. This slapped. I wish middle school me had actually read this book because this slapped. I really thought this was going to be a little more watered down, a little more like, you know, Winnie the Pooh, Frog and Toad sort of stuff with, you know, some like hints of like, ooh, mouse with sword, you know what I mean? But this was way more Watership Down and Land Before Time 1 than I expected it to be. There's rats getting killed all over the place. Even like good guys are killed once or twice in this book. Like this went hard, and I cannot believe that I, as a 6th or 7th grade child, could have walked into my school library and picked up this book, and the librarian would have been like, yes, read that. That is totally fine. It is crazy to think about the fact that I skipped this, and I skipped Animorphs when I was a kid, because both of those hold up so much, and they slap so hard, and honestly, like, calling them a kid's book is a disservice. Animorphs a little less so, because Animorphs is, while very good and tackles some subjects you wouldn't expect the funny shape change cover books to tackle, is definitely more of a kid's book than this was. This was way more Wind in the, or not, I was almost said Wind in the Willows. This is way more Watership Down than I expected it to be. This was really good. I liked it. I read this in literally like 2 days. I just chewed through it. It was awesome. I probably will not read any of the others. I know there's like 14 Redwall books or something, because I assume these books, much like the Land Before Time that I compared them to before, will suffer from Land Before Time syndrome, where the further on I get in the sequels, the more these turn into dog doo-doo, stinky pinky, actually for kids books, unlike this amazing first book that treats kids like actual humans and gives them a cool story. Redwall slaps. Read Redwall, no matter how old you are. It's really good. So that's it. Just a measly 7 books this month, which I guess is a lot in the grand scheme of things. I believe, I'm not going to check, I think with Redwall I've hit 42 books read this year, which is great. I'm almost halfway to my goal of 90, and it's not even June yet, which means 90 was probably a low ball for me, but I don't know. It depends. I might read more books that absolutely slow me to a crawl, like Zane Grey did and Steven Erikson did, and that's fine. We're not going to get into it again, but I'm excited for what May has to bring. I'm just about to start a Wheel of Time book right after I finish recording this, and then after that, I've got a whole bunch of tiny little books to read, which is going to be nice. Just snap, 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 snap. And then we're back to Wheel of Time. I bought way too many books for this year. I'm reading like a fiend, and I still don't think I'm going to read every single book I bought to read this year, which is fine. That just means, in theory, I get to save my money. But, keep reading. Hope you're reading something good. Hope the world is treating you well in these times that I will not talk about. And remember, sometimes it's really cool to be a mouse with a little sword.